When we talk about the legends of Westeros, your mind probably jumps straight to the silver-haired Targaryens riding dragons or the stoic Starks losing their heads in the capital. But if you really want to understand the soul of the Seven Kingdoms, you have to look at a man who never owned a castle, never sat on a small council, and died by the side of a muddy road with nothing to his name but 3 horses and a rusty suit of armor. That man was Ser Arlan of Pennytree. Now you might be thinking that he sounds like just another nameless hedge knight who got lucky enough to be mentioned in a prequel, but Ser Arlan was actually much bigger. Let me say that again, the man was actually way bigger than any of us realized. He wasn't just a mentor, he was the primary architect of the greatest Lord Commander the Kingsguard has ever seen. Without Arlan, there is no Ser Duncan the Tall, and without Dunk, the entire history of the Targaryen dynasty would have gone up in smoke much sooner than it did. Ser Arlan of Pennytree had his big moment in the 2nd episode of the Game of Thrones prequel, A Knight of the Seven Kingdoms. A flashback sequence kicking off the 2nd episode shows the late Hedge Knight, played by Danny Webb, stumbling butt naked out of a brothel to take a whiz. His entire ahem member is on display, and it is quite the appendage. Danny Webb's presence as Ser Arlan in A Knight of the Seven Kingdoms exists purely in flashbacks, scattered throughout the 6-episode first season. This particular scene, however, gives the audience a clear indication as to how large the man loomed in Dunk's mind. In an interview with Entertainment Weekly, showrunner and series co-creator Ira Parker remarks about Ser Arlan's big TV moment. He said, "Was that a prosthetic? I forget. I thought he just showed up on set that way, but maybe it was prosthetic." Showrunner and series co-creator Ira Parker went on to tell the interviewer, "I can't say it zips past you at 100 miles per hour because you know it's out there, but it's not the story that we're telling. It is just a flourish of the story that we're telling. It changes nothing else," Parker continues. "In order to survive to be an old man hedge knight, you had to be made of solid iron. Those were tough days for anyone, let alone a fighting warrior who lives under trees in the 14th century. So you know he's a small guy and he's slim. I figured he's got something that helps him get through those really intense battles. He's got a certain energy about him, if you will." According to the showrunner, the scene was shot to have a similar vibe to how A Knight of the Seven Kingdoms began episode 1 with a Dunk played by Peter Claffey defecation scene. It is to remind fans that we are not hanging with the upper echelon of Westeros. We are down in the muck with the small folk. So who was Ser Arlan of Pennytree? Ser Arlan was a small, slim man, but he really cast a large shadow. Dunk thought the hedge knight was closer to 60 than 50 when he died. Ser Arlan of Pennytree came from a little village in the Riverlands called, you guessed it, Pennytree. Pennytree is a large village in the Riverlands, located north of the Red Fork in the disputed border area between Stonehenge and Raventree Hall. Pennytree is situated near the Widow's Wash between 2 grassy hills known as the Teats. It is named for a huge old oak tree that grows by the Duck Pond, to which hundreds of copper pennies have been nailed. The village holdfast, as strong as any in the Riverlands, has thick stone walls 12 feet high, behind which the people of Pennytree retreat at the sign of trouble. Basically, Pennytree is a place so small and insignificant that the big lords of the realm usually only remember it when they are looking for a place to forage for supplies or burn down during a war. But for Arlan it was home, and it gave him his identity. He wasn't born with a silver spoon in his mouth. In fact, he was about as far from highborn as you can get. However, when Arlan was a little boy, his grandfather took him to King's Landing, where he saw the last dragon after the Dance of the Dragons. The dragon died a year later. This moment changed his life and contributed to some of the important decisions he later made in life. Growing up, Ser Arlan's life was the quintessential hedge knight experience, a constant cycle of riding from one keep to another, offering his sword for a hot meal and a place to sleep in the stables. He didn't have the luxury of a family legacy or a treasury to back him up. All he had was his word and his skill with a lance, which, as it turns out, was actually quite impressive. One of the most heroic and honestly underappreciated things about Ser Arlan was his sheer persistence. Most men in Westeros who find themselves at the bottom of the social ladder either turn to crime or give up entirely. Not Arlan. He lived for nearly 60 years as a hedge knight, which is basically an Olympic-level feat of survival in a world where a common cold or a grumpy lord can end you in a heartbeat. He fought in some of the most pivotal moments in the history of the realm, and he did it without the protection of a great house. Now let us talk about his actual combat record, because the books and the show give us some juicy details that prove he was no pushover. Arlan was present at the Battle of the Redgrass Field during the First Blackfire Rebellion. If you aren't a lore nerd, just know that this was essentially the Westerosi version of a world war. He was in the vanguard, right in the thick of the fighting, serving under Lord Hayford. When Lord Hayford was cut down by the legendary Gorman Peak, Arlan was right there. Arlan's nephew, Roger of Pennytree, was his squire during which Roger was killed. He saw the dragons dance and the pretenders fall. He didn't run, he didn't switch sides for gold. He stayed true to his vows, even when the realm was tearing itself apart. That kind of loyalty is rarer than Valyrian steel in the Seven Kingdoms. But Arlan's real glory wasn't just on the battlefield, it was on the tournament grounds. He once unhorsed Sir Daemon Lannister, known as the Grey Lion, during a tourney at Lannisport. Now, imagine a penniless hedge knight from a village named after a tree with pennies nailed to it knocking the Great Lion of the Rock off his high horse. That is the ultimate underdog story. He also unhorsed the Lord of House Stokeworth and the Bastard of Harrenhal in a melee at King's Landing. The man had hands, and he knew how to use a lance. His most famous moment, though, was at a tourney at Storm's End, where he went up against Prince Baelor Targaryen himself. Arlan claimed he broke 7 lances against the Prince of Dragonstone before he was finally unhorsed. Baelor, being a bit more humble, remembered it as 4 lances, but even 4 lances against the best jouster in the realm is an incredible feat. It showed that Arlan belonged in the company of greats, even if he didn't have the gold to match his skill. His greatest contribution to the realm, however, wasn't a victory in a joust. It was a choice he made in the stinking gutters of Flea Bottom. He found a young, freakishly tall orphan boy named Dunk, who was probably a day away from becoming a criminal or a corpse. Instead of walking past, Arlan took him in. He didn't need a squire, and he certainly couldn't afford another mouth to feed, but he saw something in Dunk. For 10 years, Arlan raised that boy, teaching him not just how to swing a sword, but how to be a true knight. In the books, Dunk remembers Arlan with a level of reverence that is almost holy. He recalls Arlan telling him that a knight's duty is to protect those who cannot protect themselves. Arlan wasn't just teaching him combat drills, he was drilling a moral code into a kid who had every reason to be cynical. The show adds a bit of a realistic edge to this, showing that Arlan could be a hard man. He wasn't a saint. He had a temper he drank, and he wasn't afraid to give Dunk a clout on the ear when he was being thick as a castle wall. But even with those rough edges, the core of the man was solid. He gave Dunk a father, a career, and a conscience. When Arlan died of a chill on the way to the Ashford tourney, he didn't leave Dunk a castle or a title. He left him 3 horses, Thunder, Chestnut, and Sweetfoot, and a legacy of honor. Dunk's decision to bury Arlan properly, despite having almost no money and a deadline to meet at the tourney, tells you everything you need to know about the man Arlan was. He inspired that level of devotion. Ser Arlan's impact on the realm is a slow burn victory. Because he taught Dunk to be honorable, Dunk eventually saved Prince Aegon V, also known as Egg, from his own family's madness. Because he taught Dunk to be brave, Dunk stood up to Prince Aerion Brightflame. Eventually, that skinny kid from the slums became the Lord Commander of the Kingsguard and the closest friend of a king who actually tried to help the small folk. All of those reforms, all of that stability in the realm, all trace back to a hedge knight who decided to be a benefit to those around him. So, was Ser Arlan of Pennytree bigger than we thought? Absolutely. He wasn't a giant in stature like Dunk, but he was a giant in character. He proved that you don't need a crown to change the world. You just need to raise the next generation to be better than you were. Now, I want to hear your takes in the comments. Is Ser Arlan the most underrated character in the entire George R.R. Martin mythos? Or was he just a lucky old man who found a giant kid? If you enjoyed this deep dive into the hidden history of the 7 kingdoms, make sure to smash that like button. It really helps the channel out. And if you haven't already, hit that subscribe button and ring the bell so you never miss an episode. We have plenty more lore, theories, and character breakdowns coming your way that you definitely don't want to miss. See you in my next video.